Hey everyone, so we're moving on to question 43, and by this point in time you might notice that there's a few more questions that are a bit more conceptual in nature and require a bit more written answers rather than say calculations. And one of the main reasons for this is just to draw your awareness, as this kind of tripped some of you up in the midterm, that you can have just a conceptual question in the open-ended. Doesn't necessarily need to be an equation-based calculation. So again, the final won't necessarily be like this. It'll be a bit more similar to your midterm, where the majority of questions will be calculation-based. However, just be on the lookout and really read and see what the question is asking as you're doing your questions. So uh, anyway, I digress. Here we are, question 43, and it's asking, is it possible for a pole vaulter to successfully clear a crossbar without having his or their center of gravity pass above? If so, explain how it may be done. So if you recall back to our lectures, we didn't specifically talk about pole vaulting. However, the concept between pole vaulting and, say, high jump, which we did cover in lecture, is very similar. Okay, so this is going back to our conceptual understanding of center of gravity and distribution of mass and how that affects center of gravity or center of mass. So, right. So if we think back to high jump in particular, we'll look at what we'll say is we'll have our bar, and we'll try to keep it the same for both scenarios. So here's our high jump bar. We're looking at it sideways, kind of dead on, and we have our high jumper. And essentially what they're going to do is that Fosbury flop, if you recall. So they're essentially going to hop over, lay back over top of the bar, and they have mass throughout their body. There's quite a bit of mass in around the center of our torso here, but there's also quite a lot in our head, and our legs are fairly heavy as well. So if we kind of average those out, maybe we'll see something like this. So our center of mass ends up passing just below the bar the whole time. Okay, so their center of gravity, center of mass is there. Okay. And that's a backflip. And so our extension that we have with our bodies are pretty good, but they're not fantastic. So let's return back to this question here after that short review, and we'll see that a pole vaulter, so they actually go forward over top of the bar, I believe. Yeah, they kind of like head up and they rotate themselves so that they end up facing the bar as they go over. So double thought about that one for a second. So if we put the bar roughly at the same, we already kind of answered the question, but just to apply it more directly to this question. So again, if they're going up and over, kicking their feet over, and they rotate towards the bar, so now they leave their hands actually on this side. They kick their feet over first. Okay, so this is arms towards torso, shoulders, bodies here. They can actually drop quite a bit closer to the bar and fold a little bit more over top of them. So again, maybe it's not quite to scale, which is a little unhelpful. Let's just try changing that a bit. So hips are relatively at the same height in both systems that we're looking at. Head relatively the same. But because they can actually drape closer to the bar this way as they go over, what ends up happening in pole vaulting is, still have a lot of mass here. But again, you get something that's typically even lower potentially than a high jump over top of the bar, okay? So yeah, so it is possible, and again, it's largely because of the distribution of mass of the body as it's draped over the bar keeps more mass at any given point below the bar rather than above it. So rather than this point here, our center of mass is below the bar. Okay, so that's how it would be done. So again, it would be like a pike. You could say because they hit a pike position, which would be this over here, they're easy. They can get their center mass below the bar. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's that one.